To fellow Africans celebrating Donald Trump's election in the hope that he'll be a better friend of Africa, you're in for a road shock. US presidents, regardless of party, are largely stewards of a system of vulture capitalism, global deep state machinations, and exploitative hegemony. This system has a long history of impoverishing and destabilizing Africa. In the 1940s, it oversaw the establishment of the IMF and the World Bank, institutions whose economic policies have often impoverished our continent. It also initiated the US military presence in Africa with a base in Ethiopia in 1943. In the 1950s, the US quietly supported colonial regimes, allowing colonialism and imperialism to maintain their chokehold on African nations. In the 1960s and 70s, the US system assassinated transformative African leaders like Congo's Patrice Lumumba and propped up dictators like Mobutu Sese Seko to secure Cold War interests while exploiting Africa's mineral wealth. Through the 1980s and 90s, the system tightened its financial grip on African nations through aid, loans, and the Bretton Woods institutions, while the US multinationals profited off Africa's resources and people. African debt spiraled. In the 1990s and 2000s, this system's involvement in the rise of Al-Qaeda contributed to the tragic loss of life in Africa, as evidenced by the terrorist attacks on the US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. In the 2010s, it orchestrated the events leading to the death of Muammar Gaddafi, plunging the Sahel into instability that has led to the death of thousands upon thousands and the displacement of millions. And here we are in the 2020s. Vulture capitalism, bolstered by US foreign policy, is as entrenched in Africa as ever. It manifests through the US government and US multinationals. On August 25th, 1619, more than 100 years before the US became independent, the first African slaves arrived at Fort Monroe in Hampton, Virginia. Even then, the US system was already exploiting Africans. Since then, America has strengthened and refined its strategies of control and exploitation in Africa, adapting them to modern economic and political systems. Indeed, the US system's exploitation of Africans in Africa is older than America itself. It has gotten stronger in overt and covert ways over the years. Today, no African is a literal slave in the US, but millions of Africans are shackled by economic servitude. The vulture capitalism that stems from America has impoverished millions of Africans and reduced them to slaves of the system. Every US president inherits an office beholden to this system. Donald Trump will not change this pattern. He will continue it, just as the previous occupants of the office of the US president have done. That is why we, the African people, must stop being preoccupied with US presidents, US corporations, US pop culture, and instead focus on freeing ourselves from the US system that they all serve. We must emancipate ourselves from that mental slavery. We must decolonize our minds, decolonize our food, decolonize our trade, decolonize our money. We must go back to the roots of our sovereignty and nurture that.